My name is Natalie Mercer. I am 34 years old, and for most of my adult life, my family treated me like the cautionary tale they told at dinner when they wanted to feel better about themselves. My father used to call me intense. My mother preferred difficult. My younger brother Luke had a softer way of doing the same thing. He would smile, shrug, and say I always made things bigger than they were. None of them cared that I spent my days investigating fraud inside a major healthcare network, tracing false claims, stolen identities, and forged records that ruined lives. To them, I was still the daughter who asked too many questions, left home too early, and never learned how to stay quiet long enough to be loved comfortably. Before I go further, tell me in the comments where you are watching from, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel. The message came at 6:18 on a Saturday morning. The white magnolias won't last till Monday. Most people would have read that and thought it was a sweet, ordinary note from an elderly woman worried about her garden. I did not. My grandmother, Evelyn Hart, and I had invented that sentence 3 years earlier after one of my cases exposed a nephew who had quietly taken over his aunt's accounts while convincing everyone she was becoming forgetful. Grandma had listened to every detail, then set down her teacup and told me something I never forgot. She said the most dangerous people were often the ones already trusted with the house keys. That afternoon, we created a code. If she ever texted me about the white magnolias, it meant she was being watched, pressured, or prevented from asking for help openly. She promised she would only use it if she truly had no other choice. I called emergency services before I was fully dressed. I explained that an older woman might be under coercion, that she had sent a prearranged distress phrase, and that I was on my way to her address. 11 minutes later, I pulled behind a patrol SUV in front of the brick colonial where my grandmother had lived for 42 years. My parents' sedan was already in the driveway. That was the first bad sign. The second came when the curtains in the front sitting room moved and then snapped shut. Officer Hannah Price met me at the walk with her partner, Deputy Eric Nolan. I gave them the text, my grandmother's full name, her age, and the names of the people now staying in the house. My mother, Carol Mercer, my father, Thomas Mercer, and Luke, who had supposedly moved in temporarily to help after Grandma's knee replacement. My father opened the door before I knocked. He wore a golf shirt, house shoes, and the irritated expression of a man offended that consequences had arrived before breakfast. "Natalie," he said, already turning cold. "What exactly did you do?" My mother appeared behind him with Grandma's phone in her hand. She did not even try to hide it. "This is ridiculous," she said to the officers. "Evelyn gets confused in the mornings." Officer Price's gaze dropped to the phone. "Why do you have her device, ma'am?" My mother recovered quickly. She always did. "She leaves it everywhere. We keep it charged for her." Then we heard it. A dull thud from the back of the house. Not loud, but heavy. Something between a stumble and a chair leg scraping hard wood. Everyone went still. Officer Nolan asked, "Who else is here?" "No one," my father answered too fast. Another sound came, this time sharper, like glass tapping wood. Officer Price stepped past both of them. "We need to speak with Ms. Hart alone." My father moved to block the hallway. It was only half a step, but it told me everything. He did not shout. He did not threaten. He simply positioned himself between authority and an elderly woman. That was enough. "Sir," Price said, voice flat, "move." For the first time that morning, my father looked uncertain. My mother tried another approach. She gave the officers a tired, patient smile and said, "My daughter does this. She turns family stress into drama. Evelyn has been emotional since surgery." The lie was elegant because it explained everything in one sentence. A fragile old woman, exhausted caregivers, an unstable daughter with a talent for overreacting. I had seen that structure before in case files, depositions, and panicked interviews. Simple lies travel well because they spare listeners the effort of doubt. The room at the end of the hallway was not locked, but the silver child-proof latch had been flipped high on the outside of the doorframe. That small detail made my skin go cold. Not because it looked violent, because it looked reasonable. Something a person could explain away in seconds. Officer Nolan opened the door. My grandmother was in the sunroom, sitting sideways in a wicker chair near the windows. The room was hot, despite the morning cool outside. Her water glass sat on a side table far beyond her reach. A cane lay on the floor. There was a purple mark near her wrist, and another, yellowing one, above her ankle. The sliding door to the patio had a dowel jammed in its track from the outside. She saw me first. Then she touched 2 fingers to her necklace and held them there. That was our second signal. It meant, I sent the message on purpose. Do not let anyone speak for me. My mother tried to push forward, but Officer Price stopped her with one arm. Please stay in the hall. My father started explaining before anyone asked him to. Grandma had nearly fallen. She had been wandering at night. The latch was for her safety. The bruises were from blood thinners. The heat in the room was because she always complained of chills. Each sentence arrived polished and ready, like he had practiced them in the mirror. Grandma's voice, when it came, was thin but steady. Natalie, she said, don't let them answer for me. The house changed at that moment. What had been a family disagreement became a possible elder abuse scene. Price called for paramedics. Nolan photographed the latch, the blocked door, the inaccessible water, the medication organizer on the dresser inside the room. I noticed 3 pill compartments already empty, though it was barely morning. Grandma noticed where I was looking and gave the smallest shake of her head. Not all the pills were hers. That detail hit me later. Price crouched beside her and asked clear questions. Was she hurt? Yes. Did she feel safe staying in the house? No. Had anyone kept her from leaving the room? Yes. Had anyone taken her phone? Yes. My father muttered, "This is insane." My mother said, "She's not in her right mind." Neither one asked if she needed a doctor. Paramedics arrived and examined Grandma in the dining room while the officers separated the rest of us. I stood near the front bay window and watched my reflection tremble in the glass. In the kitchen, my parents began constructing me into a story. My mother said I had unstable employment. My father said I had a history of resentment. Luke, who had come down the stairs in wrinkled clothes and bare feet, added quietly that I had always dramatized conflict. I was not unemployed. I was not unstable. I had spent 12 years building cases out of fragments other people missed. Yet hearing them say those things with such calm conviction did something ugly to my chest, because family lies have a different kind of weight. They are built not only to mislead others, but to make you wonder how much of yourself was rewritten behind your back. When the paramedics prepared to take Grandma to the hospital, she asked to speak to me alone for just a moment. Officer Price stayed within sight but out of earshot. "In the pantry," Grandma whispered, her lips barely moving. "Behind the flour canister. Green recipe tin. Bring it to Nora." "Nora who?" "Nora Bell, my attorney." I nodded. Then she tightened her hand around mine with surprising force. "And Natalie," she said, "if Luke starts helping, do not mistake fear for innocence." That sentence stayed with me all day. At the hospital, a social worker evaluated Grandma's orientation, memory, judgment, and ability to describe her circumstances. She answered everything clearly. The year, the president, her medications, her banker's name. The last 3 withdrawals she did not authorize. She explained that my parents had moved into her home after surgery under the promise of helping her recover. At first, they drove her to appointments, sorted bills, and filled prescriptions. Then the help changed shape. They began opening her mail, canceling lunch plans with friends, screening her calls, telling church members she was repeating herself, correcting her in front of strangers, suggesting she rest whenever she asked for financial papers. 2 weeks earlier, Luke had brought printed forms and told her signing them would simplify insurance issues. My father stood beside him. My mother kept saying, "It's just routine." Grandma refused because the pages were clipped face down. The next morning, her checkbook was missing. 3 days later, so was the title file for her lake cottage in Vermont. That got my attention. The cottage had been her one sentimental property, too old and drafty to impress anyone, but priceless to her, because my grandfather had rebuilt its porch with his own hands. "Why didn't you call me sooner?" I asked. She looked at the ceiling for a long moment. "Because the first person they needed to underestimate was you." I drove from the hospital to her house with Officer Nolan behind me. My parents were no longer there. Luke's car was gone too. Under police supervision, I searched the pantry and found a dented green recipe tin behind 2 paper bags of flour. Inside were index cards, biscuit recipes, and a small brass key taped beneath the lid. Folded inside a recipe for peach cobbler was a note in Grandma's handwriting. Unit 214, Cedar Grove Storage. If they move too fast, open this before they tell the court who I am. By noon, I was in Attorney Nora Bell's office downtown. Nora was in her late 50s, sharp-eyed and unsentimental in the way that immediately made me trust her. She did not waste time comforting me. She simply held out her hand for the key, unlocked a legal pad, and said, "Tell me everything in order." My friend Jasmine Cole arrived 10 minutes later. She worked in digital evidence recovery and had helped me more than once with metadata, deleted files, and document trails people swore no longer existed. Unlike my family, Jasmine knew exactly what I did and never once called it some paperwork job. At Cedar Grove Storage, Unit 214 contained no furniture, no boxes of family heirlooms, no sentimental clutter. It held 4 banker's boxes, a locked metal cash case, and a framed photograph of my grandparents standing beside the lake cottage 40 years earlier, smiling into a wind that had lifted Grandma's hair off her shoulders. The cash case opened with the brass key. Inside were original deeds, old and current wills, a competency letter from Grandma's physician written 3 months earlier, copies of her brokerage statements, and a spiral notebook dated across the last 7 months. Every page documented a pressure point: calls intercepted, visitors discouraged, jewelry missing and later found in strange places, medication mixed up, signatures requested during pain episodes. Her handwriting grew shakier on the pages written just after surgery, then stronger again. At the bottom of one page, underlined twice, were the words, "They want the cottage first because it can be sold faster than the house." There was also a flash drive. Jasmine plugged it into her laptop in Nora's conference room. It contained scanned documents, voice memos, photos of envelopes already opened before reaching Grandma, and images of a yellow legal folder labeled Maple Shore Transfer. The name meant nothing to me until we opened the corresponding PDF. It was a draft sale packet for the Vermont Lake Cottage. Buyer, North Ledger Holdings, LLC. Purchase price, less than half the most recent appraised value. Signing authority, Evelyn Hart, by agent under power of attorney. That power of attorney was dated 6 days earlier. Grandma had not signed it. Nora swore under her breath and immediately began filing for emergency injunctive relief, and temporary protection against any transfer of Grandma's real property. Jasmine started authenticating the files. I built a timeline from the notebook and statements. Halfway through, my phone lit up with an email from a law firm I did not recognize. Attached was a petition seeking emergency conservatorship over Evelyn Hart, filed by my parents. The petition claimed Grandma was mentally declining, vulnerable to manipulation, and currently being isolated by an estranged granddaughter with erratic employment and a history of obsessive behavior. Attached were declarations from my father, my mother, and Luke. According to Luke, he had personally witnessed increasing confusion, repeated memory failures, and my aggressive fixation on family finances. I read his statement twice because betrayal is sometimes easier to process when it arrives in legal formatting. Nora did not let me spiral. "Good," she said, which was not the reaction I expected. I stared at her. "Good," she repeated, "because desperate people write too much. Let them commit to a story. Then we show where it breaks." The hearing was set for the next morning. That night, my parents came to the hospital. They did not get past security because Grandma had removed them from her visitor list. My mother cried in the corridor where cameras could see her. My father asked loudly why I was hiding an old woman from her own family. They wanted a scene. They wanted me upset, reactive, useful to their narrative. But I had spent too many years watching frightened people sabotage themselves by performing pain in front of manipulators who were calmly taking notes. So I stood still, showed hospital security my ID, and requested a written incident report. My father leaned close enough for only me to hear. "You've wanted to humiliate us for years." "No," I said. "I just stopped helping you hide." The next morning, the courtroom was small, overheated, and crowded with the kind of silence that carries judgment before evidence begins. My parents sat in pressed clothes with mournful faces. Luke looked pale and would not meet my eyes. Grandma appeared by video from the hospital, hair brushed, chin lifted, glasses on. She looked tired, but unmistakably herself. Their attorney presented me exactly as they had planned. Estranged, emotionally volatile, professionally inconsistent. A granddaughter who had inserted herself into an old woman's confusion for personal gain. Then Nora stood. She submitted the physician's competency letter, the hospital social worker's assessment, photographs of the exterior latches, documented control of Grandma's phone, evidence of intercepted communication, and the draft sale packet tied to the forged power of attorney. She also corrected the court's impression of me. "Ms. Mercer," she said, "is a senior fraud investigator specializing in healthcare financial abuse, false record analysis, and coordinated institutional referrals. Whether her resume impresses anyone is irrelevant. What matters is that Ms. Hart asked for help, sent a prearranged distress signal, and remains capable of stating her wishes." I looked at my parents when Nora said those words. My father's face changed first. Not to shame, not to regret, to shock. As if discovering my real work mattered only because it threatened him now. The judge denied the emergency conservatorship request. She appointed a neutral, temporary fiduciary, froze any transfer attempts related to disputed assets, and ordered immediate preservation of all financial and communication records. For one breath, I thought we were ahead. Then, opposing counsel disclosed that the sale of the Vermont Lake Cottage was already scheduled to close electronically at 3:30 that afternoon through a title agency in Burlington. If the freeze order did not reach the right hands in time, the deposit could move before the transaction was fully stopped. We had less than 4 hours. Outside the courthouse, Luke brushed past me like I was smoke. 10 minutes later, a text arrived from an unknown number. "Check the boathouse, under the workbench. Bring no police or they'll burn everything." I showed Nora and Jasmine. Trap or conscience? Jasmine asked. I thought of Grandma's warning. Do not mistake fear for innocence. We did not go alone. We did not go without documentation. And we did not go without letting Officer Price know exactly where we would be. The lake cottage stood empty when we arrived, shutters half closed, air stale, porch leaning slightly toward the trees. My grandfather's boathouse sat 30 yards down the slope, weathered cedar faded silver by years of rain. Under the workbench, beneath an oilcloth and a tin of rusted screws, we found a zippered portfolio bag. Inside were practice sheets covered in copies of Grandma's signature, a portable scanner, a burner phone, and a folder stamped with the title company's logo. There was also a second phone, older, cracked at one corner, still holding a charge. On it were text threads between my mother, my father, Luke, and a man named Darren Pike, the remote notary coordinating the forged documents. One message from Luke, sent just after midnight, read, "If the judge freezes the sale, we pivot to the cabin trust and say Nana already agreed." Another from my mother read, "Natalie only knows how to react. Keep her mad and she'll do the rest for us." I had to set the phone down after that because sometimes the most painful evidence is not the theft. It is the proof that your wounds were studied like tools. Luke appeared in the doorway of the boathouse before I heard his steps. He looked smaller than I remembered. Not physically, morally. Like something inside him had finally collapsed under its own excuses. "You came," he said. "You signed a declaration against her." He swallowed. "I know." "Did you send the text?" He nodded. "Why?" His eyes went to the portfolio bag on the floor. "Because Dad said if I kept helping, none of this would trace back to me. Then Mom told me if I backed out, they'd say the forged tax attachments were mine. And some of them were. I told myself I was fixing paperwork. I told myself Grandma would never lose anything permanent." He laughed once, broken and joyless. That sounds disgusting now that I say it out loud. "Now?" He flinched. That was the thing about late honesty. It often arrives carrying self-preservation in one hand and remorse in the other. Luke unlocked the burner phone with shaking fingers and showed us the latest thread. My parents were meeting Darren Pike that evening at the cottage. They believed Luke still had the backup documents and planned to exchange them for cash and whatever remained of the sale arrangement. They were not walking away. They were trying to salvage the fraud. Officer Price moved fast once Jasmine extracted the messages, and Nora forwarded the forged document set to the title agency and state investigators. The sale was suspended 47 minutes before completion. A warrant followed for the cottage, the boathouse materials, electronic devices, and the Mercer residence. That night, under police instruction, Luke agreed to respond to the messages as if nothing had changed. The cottage smelled of damp wood and old summers when we went back. Officers placed recording devices in the main room and waited out of sight in the kitchen, hallway, and back porch. I stayed only because Darren Pike had never seen me and because I understood the documents well enough to force precise language if they started being vague. At 8:11, my parents arrived. My mother entered first in a camel coat as if she were attending a dinner reservation instead of a criminal handoff. My father came behind her, carrying a leather briefcase. Darren Pike arrived 2 minutes later, thin, careful, watchful, the kind of man who had spent years mistaking caution for morality. Luke sat at the table with the copied folder. I sat across from him. My mother stopped cold. "Why is she here?" "Because," I said, "I can tell if the replacements match the originals." My father actually smiled. "Always desperate to sound important." But his hands were too tight on the briefcase handle. Darren asked about the title freeze. My mother said it was temporary. My father said they could still use the trust route if Luke destroyed the practice sheets and the prior packet. Darren asked whether Evelyn would cooperate. My mother answered, "Once the conservatorship is granted, her preferences stop mattering." My father added, "We only need one clean set and a doctor willing to sign capacity concerns." Every word landed exactly where the detectives needed it. Then Luke hesitated before taking the envelope Darren offered. It was barely a pause, but my mother saw it. Mothers like mine always notice the wrong silences too late. She turned to him sharply. "What did you tell them?" Before he could answer, the side door opened. "Enough," a voice said. My grandmother stood in the doorway with Officer Price beside her and a victim advocate at her shoulder. She was not supposed to be there until the scene was secure, but one look at her face told me she had chosen this. And for once, no one was going to decide protection meant excluding her from the truth. She did not look fragile. She looked finished. My father rose so fast his chair slammed backward. "Evelyn?" "No," she said. One word, clear enough to cut the room in half. Officers stepped in from every side and ordered hands visible. Darren froze. My mother went pale. My father looked not frightened, but offended, as if reality had violated some agreement to keep flattering him. Grandma held a small brass object in her palm. At first, I thought it was a locket. Then I realized it was the removable cap from the antique desk pen my grandfather had restored years ago. "It records," she said quietly. "It has recorded for months." Nora had never mentioned that part to me. Later, she explained Grandma insisted fewer people should know. The pen sat on her writing desk in plain sight, syncing to an encrypted archive whenever it was docked. It had captured coaching before medical visits, arguments about forged signatures, Luke's panic, my mother's threats to declare her incompetent, and my father's plan to sell the cottage before anyone understood the paperwork. The distress text had not begun the case. It had triggered the endgame. My father looked at me with naked hatred. "You set up your own family." Grandma answered before I could. "No, you set yourselves up the moment you decided my life was inventory." I will remember that line for the rest of my life, because it was not dramatic. It was precise. My parents were arrested that night along with Darren Pike. Luke was not immediately. He surrendered the devices, retained counsel, and began cooperating under no promise except that honesty would at least be counted instead of invented later. The investigation lasted months. Forensic accountants traced attempted theft, diverted funds, fraudulent fee payments, and planned transfers tied to the cottage sale and a sham family trust. Experts confirmed the signatures had been practiced and layered from old holiday cards and legal records. Hospital documentation supported Grandma's account of isolation, chemical overmedication, and restricted communication. The recordings did the rest. Luke pleaded guilty to falsifying records and assisting financial exploitation. He lost his CPA license, repaid what he could, accepted probation, restitution, and permanent professional ruin. Some relatives called that mercy. Others called it disgrace. I still do not know what I call it, on days when I remember how easily he stood beside them while Grandma's world got smaller. My mother pleaded out before trial. My father went all the way to a verdict. He claimed misunderstanding, generosity, family confusion. He said Grandma wanted the cottage sold. He said I orchestrated everything because I had always hated him. But lies built for control rarely survive once every private sentence is dragged into daylight and arranged in order. He was convicted. Not because I finally proved I was impressive. Not because my career sounded important in a courtroom. Not because the family scapegoat had one dramatic victory. He was convicted because Grandma told the truth, kept records, asked for help, and refused to surrender her voice to the people who were trying to manage her out of her own life. A year later, she moved into a smaller house 10 minutes from mine. She chose it herself. Wide hallways, bright kitchen, 2 maple trees out front. She hired independent financial oversight, rejoined her church luncheon group, and started a small legal aid fund to help older adults get document reviews before signing powers of attorney, trust amendments, or property transfers. On the first spring morning after the move, she planted a magnolia tree near the porch. I helped her press the soil down around the roots. For years, I thought the deepest wound my family left in me was their refusal to see me clearly. I was wrong. The deeper wound was how often I kept trying to earn clarity from people committed to distortion. Once I stopped doing that, something in me went quiet in the best possible way. Peace did not come all at once. It came in pieces. The first time I ignored a relative fishing for gossip. The first holiday I did not explain my absence. The first Sunday Grandma answered her own front door, smiled at the person standing there, and decided for herself whether to invite them in. People sometimes ask whether what happened was revenge. I understand why. My parents called me dramatic, unstable, and unimportant. They built their strategy around the belief that I would either stay ashamed or explode on command. Instead, the same patience they mocked became the thing that exposed them. But revenge was never the part that mattered most to me. The part that mattered was this. An old woman who had been cornered in her own home got her life back. A locked sunroom became an open porch. A monitored phone became a line she controlled. A family that treated love like ownership lost access to both. And I finally understood that being underestimated is painful, yes, but it can also be the last blind spot arrogant people ever get to keep. As for Luke, I still don't have a clean answer. Some days I think confession after fear is still confession. Other days I think truth that arrives only when self-protection fails is just another bargain wearing a moral face. Maybe both are true. Maybe forgiveness is not a door you unlock once. Maybe it is a hallway you walk only if peace requires it, and stop the moment it asks you to forget. Grandma never asked me to forgive anyone. She only asked me to notice who benefited whenever silence was called kindness. I have never forgotten that. And if there is one thing I hope stays with you after this story, it is that control does not always look loud. Sometimes it looks tidy, helpful, organized, reasonable. Sometimes it wears a family name and carries groceries through the front door. Sometimes it tells the truth just enough to hide the theft underneath. And sometimes the person everyone dismisses as difficult is the only one still paying close enough attention to save what matters. If you like this story, subscribe my channel for more beautiful stories.